What's up, YouTube universe? I'm Dash.
And welcome to How to Transit.
Before we start, I just want to be sure to remind everyone that if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like this video.
Please subscribe to the channel as we'll be posting more videos more often.
And ring that notification bell so you can be notified of my next upload. And this is the story of the Silverliner IV. Now, the name Silverliner was given to the electric multiple unit cars used by Philadelphia area railroad fleets dating back as far as 1963. Before the Philadelphia area would see Silverliners, there was the Pioneer III. This was a fleet of 6 cars that were delivered in 1958 that served as a test bed for what would become the Silverliner fleet. The Pioneer III Order was numbered from 150 to 155. In 1963, the Philadelphia area would see the name Silverliner for the first time, with an order of cars built by the Budd Company to replace aging cars from both the Pennsylvania and Reading Railroad. Because of the financial state of the Reading Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time, the government stepped in and formed the Passenger Service Improvement Corporation. This operation would go on to purchase new cars based on the Pioneer III from the Budd Company. These cars will use a design similar to the Pioneer III, but would have many enhancements to make these cars state-of-the-art, including new pantographs, propulsion system, HVAC operations, and quieter operations overall. These cars were originally dubbed the PSIC cars after the Passenger Service Improvement Corporation. But once the cars arrived, the silver sides and stainless steel bodies were dominantly viewed, and the name Silverliner was born. A year later, SEPTA was formed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to oversee rail operations within southeastern Pennsylvania. This would mean that from this point onward, SEPTA will be responsible for rail operations within this section of the state. Since SEPTA was formed by the state, that would also mean that funding will primarily come from Pennsylvania as opposed to from fare revenue as it was in the past. One of the first things SEPTA did to the fleet was slight fleet expansions. In 1967, SEPTA will receive new Silverliner cars from the St. Louis Car Company to operate on the Pennsylvania Railroad lines in suburban Philadelphia. These cars were dubbed Silverliner III, and these cars will also retroactively change the fleet forever. Upon delivery of the Silverliner III coaches, the previous Silverliner cars was dubbed Silverliner II, and the Pioneer III fleet was redubbed Silverliner I. This is when the name Silverliner was cemented into the SEPTA fleet. Pennsylvania Railroad will also be replaced with Penn Central Railroad in suburban Philadelphia, but that's another story for another video. Now that we know the history of the name Silverliner, we must also look at the history of the Silverliner IV specifically. By 1973, SEPTA noticed that Penn Central and Reading Railroad were both operating with some antiquated equipment, most of which dated back to the 1930s, which at that point was around 40 years ago. SEPTA partnered with General Electric and AVCO to design and create the new generation of Silverliner cars, using a lot of the design elements from the Silverliner III cars with some updated features such as a new modernized HVAC system, provisions for center doors exclusive to high-level boarding, and more. In 1974, the first of these Silverliner IV cars came into the system to replace those aging cars on the Reading Railroad and the Penn Central Railroads. Their numbers reflected which operation they would go to, as the first Reading units would continue through the 9000 series, and the Penn Central units would continue from 270 and up, picking up where the Silverliner II numbers for both fleets ended. The last of the Reading batch were numbered from 101 to 188. SEPTA would also renumber the remaining Silverliner I cars from 244 to 248 to keep the Penn Central numbering consistent. The order of Silverliner IV cars was quite literally the largest order to date, being of 232 cars. To reflect the SEPTA ownership, the Silverliner IV cars would receive both SEPTA logos and operating logos on the front of the vehicles as well as the sides, as these were the only vehicles at the time directly owned by SEPTA. The final Reading units, numbered 129 through 188, would not receive any operator logo, as they arrived right when the Reading Railroad would be absorbed into Conrail in April 1976. Eventually, the 9000 series as well as those earlier 100 series Reading units will receive Conrail badging instead. When SEPTA assumed operations of the railroads in 1983, all operator logos were covered by SEPTA official square logos to reflect this. To date, the Silverliner IV fleet is the largest fleet of Silverliners in operation by SEPTA Regional Rail. By the late 1980s, SEPTA received Comet 2 light cars as well as some AEM 7s to replace the older remaining push-pull cars. These Comet 2 cars were dubbed SEPTA 1, with more cars coming by 1990 to replace the remaining Silverliner 1 units. At this point, however, the fleet was still dominantly Silverliner 4. In the 1990s, the Silverliner 4 cars went through an overhaul that would see the X-Reading 9000 series cars, as well as many Penn Central units, renumbered in the 400 series to reflect the fact that the PCB transformers were replaced. This number change was also reflect which units received the change. During this time period, the design phase of the Silverliner V has started, and it was originally going to be designed similar to the SEPTA 1 cars. 2005, SEPTA put out an RFP for those Silverliner V cars, and they were meant to arrive by 2009, replacing the Silverliner 2 and 3 cars, as well as some Silverliner 4s. The contract will be awarded to Hyundai Rotem, who would eventually build a plant in South Philadelphia to build these cars. Despite conflicts and many other delays, by 2008, we would see the first mock-up car, which showed off all the features we would see in the Silverliner V. This mock-up was number 701 and took riders and fans by storm. By 2009, no cars were yet built. Problems plagued the Silverliner 2 fleet, which caused many of the cars pulled from service. After many delays, in 2010, the Silverliner 5 cars would finally come into service. But the order was only enough to replace the Silverliner 2 and 3 cars, which had to be removed from the rails by 2013. The Silverliner 5 will feature many state-of-the-art upgrades and a completely refreshed design compared to previous generations. These were the first cars not to be based on the Pioneer 3. When these cars arrived, they replaced the remaining Silverliner 2 and 3 cars in the fleet. The option order had not been exercised, so the Silverliner V fleet would only consist of 120 cars, which is still about half as many Silverliner 4 cars that operate today, and this is where the problems began. The Silverliner V fleet was completely removed from service in July 2016 after faults in the units were found. This will force SEPTA to run the Silverliner 4 cars more often and more frequently, as well as borrow equipment from Amtrak and MARC to maintain operation on the lines. The Silverliner 5 cars were eventually returned to service by November 2016, but at that point, the damage to the regional rail operation had already been done. Reliability reputation was at an all-time low, but SEPTA was continuing to combat this. In 2017, SEPTA will order 45 multi-level cars from a company called CRRC, a Chinese-based rail manufacturer, as finally, ridership had gone back up to the levels anticipated. These cars will replace some of the Silverliner 4 units and be paired to the ACS 64 units ordered a year prior. These cars were due to be delivered in 2020, so all in all, it was looking up. Some of those aging Silverliner 4s were finally going to be put to rest, and the issue of capacity in the system would finally be addressed. In 2018, SEPTA was looking into even more multi-level trailer cars from New Jersey Transit's Bombardier order. This actually didn't go anywhere though, but they would have more than likely replaced the remaining Silverliner 4 units if it did happen. But by 2020, when the CRRC rail cars were due to be delivered, a certain pandemic happened that would impact the world as a whole. Trade stopped, the world halted, and not a single CRRC car was built. This means that the Silverliner 4 cars had to press on longer until the pandemic was over. I'm not saying the name of the pandemic on purpose. In 2022, the cars were finally revealed to the public. The first 2 pilot cars were built, number 2421 and 2422. This was a big announcement and hope for the future remained. This would mean at least 50 of the 232 Silverliner 4 cars would finally be replaced with these cars. In 2023, SEPTA announced that they were looking to order Silverliner 6 units. This would also mean that the remaining Silverliner 4s were finally going to come off the rail. All was looking up and up yet again. But then in April 2024, after 4 years of delays, SEPTA had announced that they were canceling the CRRC Order, as even to this point, the only cars built were the 2 built in 2022, and there is quite a few issues with the imports as well. But at its core, that means that the Silverliner IVs had to stick around even longer. Financial woes start to show their heads as well. You see, back in 2020, when that pandemic hit, ridership and funding for public transportation as a whole plummeted to an all-time low across the entire United States. To this day, ridership has never fully recovered from this, and as a result, neither did transit funding. Money to maintain fleets and acquire new rail equipment was also at an all-time low. Federal and state help was just at the bare minimum. And here we sit today, still sitting with Silverliner IV cars, some of which are 50 years old, running on the rails. Even though the National Transportation Safety Board had recently recommended that SEPTA remove all the Silverliner IV cars from the rails, and even though there is no replacements in sight, SEPTA still operates Silverliner V cars and has push-pull cars. This would at least be able to recover half of what's needed to maintain service. However, that would still mean a 50% service cut would be needed until the Silverliner VI cars come into operation, should they remove the Silverliner IV cars from service. This is why, despite all the fires that happened over the past year, SEPTA is doing their best to maintain the Silverliner IV fleet on the rails. Despite all the attempts in the past to replace them failing, there is just too many cars in the fleet to just let them die with no replacement. The very cars that were purchased by SEPTA to save the system are the very ones needed to be saved. So despite all the issues that was had, a lot of history is currently repeating itself. With SEPTA being primarily state funded and the state funding being at an all-time low, SEPTA is now in the same situation that the railroads of the past was once in. Did you like that history lesson? Would you like more? Subscribe, as we will be posting more videos more often. And remember to hit that bell. Thanks for watching, and peace out.